The emergency lights pulsed a sickly blue, casting a strobe over the medbay of the Syrexian research vessel, Tavronil. The air smelled faintly of sterilized copper and melted plastic. Kalen Truce, crouched shirtless on a diagnostic table, rubbed the back of his neck and squinted at the overhead light. "Seriously, I'm fine," he said, voice rough from hours of dry recycled air. "It's just a heat rash. I've had worse after a summer jog." Across the room, Nurse Helvig stood completely still, his 6 ocular nodes dilating in horror. His upper limbs twitched in short, erratic bursts, and a diagnostic tablet trembled in his left hand. "You are deteriorating," Helvig said, his voice a low vibration. "The dermal discoloration has spread 20 millimeters in the last hour. Your internal temperature has risen 0.4 kelvins. Your epidermis is rupturing." Kalen resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "That's just sweat and friction. I was in my EVA suit for 4 hours on that desert moon. The suit heating system went out. It's not some alien parasite or whatever it is you're thinking." Helvig took 2 steps closer and scanned Kalen's torso again. The diagnostic light passed over the red splotches along his ribs, already fading at the edges. The nurse's top limb hovered over a panel, hesitating. "Motion restriction. Scaly surface. It is spreading. I must inform Dr. Krezel. You will be quarantined." Kalen hopped off the table, wincing as his bare foot hit the cold floor. No quarantine. I'm telling you, it's a heat rash. Give me some hydrocortisone, maybe an antihistamine, and I'll be good. Don't go calling the ship's entire medical department." Helvig tilted his head. "A histamine? You wish to stimulate your immune system further. Antihistamine. It blocks the reaction," Kalen said, tugging a towel around his waist. "I'm not contagious. It'll clear up on its own." Helvig hesitated again. Then, without warning, he slammed a palm against the alert panel. A sharp chime echoed through the mebbay. "Patient Kalen Truce entering critical dermal failure," the panel barked. "Requesting immediate level 2 isolation." Kalen slapped his forehead. "You've got to be kidding me." 2 Syrexian medtechs burst into the room wearing full containment gear. One of them held a translucent restraint band, the other a portable isolation field generator. "Guys, I'm not dying," Kalen shouted, backing up toward the supply cabinet. The first tech aimed the field generator. A shimmering wall of energy blinked into existence, encasing Kalen in a bubble. "Do not resist," Helvig said. "We will stabilize you." Kalen blew out a frustrated breath. "It's a rash." He watched as Helvig busied himself with a series of scans, whispering to the med techs in hushed Syrexian clicks and low tones. They examined his skin under magnification, swabbed samples, and even took a blood draw. Over the next hour, Kalen sat cross-legged inside the isolation bubble while the staff ran tests with increasing urgency. At one point, Helvig even brought in a robotic dermal excision tool, which Kalen very loudly refused. "Look," Kalen said through gritted teeth, "if you cut into my side for a skin sample, I will file a complaint so loud it'll echo back to Earth." Helvig paused, the tool humming softly in his hand. "You are refusing potentially life-saving diagnostics?" "I'm refusing unnecessary surgery for what is essentially a heat-induced rash." Helvig clicked the tool off. "You would rather perish than be examined thoroughly? I'd rather not be butchered over a misdiagnosis." Just then, Dr. Krezel entered. Her robes swished like dry leaves and her silver eyes flashed toward Helvig's. "Report," she said. "Patient exhibits progressive dermal necrosis, mild fever elevation, and potential systemic breakdown," Helvig replied. Dr. Krezel nodded solemnly. "How long does he have?" Kalen stood up, arms out. "I'm not dying." Dr. Krezel approached the isolation field, scanning him visually. "Why is he conscious?" "Because I'm not sick." Kalen snapped. "Let me show you something." He turned, walked to the field's edge, and lifted the towel slightly to reveal the rash's edge. "See that? Already fading. That's what heat rash does." "It's not dermal necrosis. It's a bunch of clogged sweat glands." Dr. Krezel frowned. "You're certain?" Kalen nodded. "I've had this a dozen times on Earth. Hot weather, friction, no airflow. It's annoying, not deadly." Helvig looked genuinely baffled. "You survive this regularly?" "Yeah. You take a cool shower, maybe apply a cream, and it goes away." Dr. Krezel turned to Helvig. "Cancel the quarantine alert. Begin topical treatment and monitor vitals passively." Helvig hesitated. "But now," Dr. Krezel said. The isolation field powered down with a soft hiss. Kalen stepped out, rolling his shoulder. That was a lot of drama for a Rash, he muttered. Helvix looked at him as if seeing a ghost. You are remarkably durable. Kalen gave a tired grunt and walked over to grab his uniform jacket. No, I just know my own skin. The next morning, Kalen returned to the med bay, this time clothed and carrying a small container. This, he said, placing the tube on Helvix's desk, is hydrocortisone cream. You might want to stock a few. Helvix picked it up cautiously. You apply this. Externally. Yup. Works like a charm. Helvix scanned it with his tablet. Chemical composition suggests anti-inflammatory properties. Exactly. Try not to freak out next time. Helvix paused. May I study your skin profile? Kalen raised an eyebrow. You mean a biopsy? No, just dermal imaging. For educational purposes. Kalen shrugged. Fine, but no scalpels. Over the next few days, Helvix became obsessed with understanding human skin. He dragged Kalen in for thermal imaging, moisture retention analysis, and even stress response testing, none of which required contact, thankfully. By day 4, Helvix had compiled a full report titled Human Dermal Elasticity and Resilience in High-Temperature Environments. Dr. Krezel read it over breakfast and laughed aloud for the first time in Kalen's presence. You thought he was dying of a skin irritation, she said. It presented aggressively, Helvix replied, unamused. Kalen leaned back in his chair. I've got a scar from a 3rd-degree burn on my leg. Want to analyze that too? Helvix perked up. Absolutely. Kalen groaned. 2 weeks later, the rash was gone entirely, and Helvix had developed a new protocol for identifying benign skin conditions in humans. It was quietly added to the Syrexian Medical Index, along with a footnote. Do not assume all surface discoloration is catastrophic. Consultation with the patient is advised. Kalen received a commendation for exceptional patience during interspecies medical integration. He laminated it and stuck it to his locker door. Next time I get a paper cut, you gonna call for backup, he teased Helvix during a routine checkup. Helvix didn't look up from his tablet. Only if it spreads. 3 days after the dermal incident, Kalen stood in the Tavronil's hydroponics bay, elbow deep in a crate of nutrient paste. His assignment was simple: recalibrate the moisture dispersal system for the Earth-native vegetation section, which had been flooding the lettuce beds every 3rd cycle. He was halfway through untangling a calcium tubing not when a Syrexian assistant technician scurried over, limbs twitching in divided focus. You are Kalen Truce, the assistant said without introduction. The one who did not disintegrate from the epidermal outbreak. Kalen glanced up, paste-coated gloves dripping. That's me. The rash survivor. The technician leaned in. There is a request for you. Interspecies Medical Symposium. For levels up. You will present. I didn't volunteer for anything. You were selected. Dr. Krezel said you exhibit unusual parameters. You are to arrive by 2nd cycle interval. Is this about the rash again? The assistant's pupils expanded. No. They want a complete overview of physiological stress responses under type 3 atmospheric irregularities. Your file indicates exposure. Kalen peeled off one glove. You mean that time I blacked out on the ammonia moon? The technician blinked once in affirmation. Kalen wiped his hand on his pant leg. Fine. I'll clean up and head there. But I'm not doing any public speaking. I almost lost consciousness that day. You will be examined. Not questioned. Great, Kalen muttered. Just what I needed. Another round of being poked like raw meat. He arrived at the symposium chamber 40 minutes later, hair still damp from a rushed rinse. The room resembled a transparent geode, its walls gleaming with crystalline facets that shifted hue according to ambient mood signals. A dozen species were present, including 2 Medhari surgeons, a Clinian exobiologist with a respiratory tank, and a Syrexian pair who communicated via scent pulses. Dr. Krezel motioned from the center platform. Approach. The audience is prepared. Kalen stepped up, noticing the table had 0 chairs. He stood awkwardly while a Syrexian released a swirl of violet mist that made his nose itch. Dr. Krezel gestured toward his torso. We will be focusing on your pulmonary collapse during the ammonia exposure. Your recovery was considered statistically improbable. No offense, Kalen said, but I'd rather not relive the worst lung cramp of my life. Helvix emerged from behind a screen, holding a small inhalation interface. We have replicated the atmospheric conditions at 1/10 concentration. You will not be harmed. Just monitored. You're testing me with diluted poison? Controlled stimulus. We require real-time immune response data. Kalen sighed. You people really don't do small talk, do you? He sat on the edge of the platform and allowed Helvix to strap the mask over his face. A faintness followed, and the air inside the mask took on a sharp, metallic tang that made his eyebrows twitch. Dr. Krezel stared at a monitor. Blood oxygen saturation declining 4%. Core temperature steady. No panic response. I'm not thrilled, if that's what you're wondering, Kalen said through gritted teeth. The Medhari surgeon leaned in. Your bronchial pathways are constricting, yet you persist in remaining upright. I'd rather not pass out in front of a dozen species. Helvix tapped another control. We will now introduce physical exertion. Please perform 5 squat repetitions. You want me to do calisthenics while I'm half asphyxiated? It is vital. Kalen grunted and began to squat. By the 4th, his vision blurred at the edges and he felt the telltale burn behind his eyes. He finished the 5th and ripped off the mask. Okay, that's enough science for one day. Dr. Krezel approached with a scanner. Remarkable. You suffered no tissue damage. The average Medhari requires pulmonary bleaching after exposure of that duration. I just coughed up something green for a week, Kalen replied. Nothing permanent. The Syrexians released a swirl of gold vapor. The translation panel buzzed. Human lungs are inefficient, but surprisingly tolerant. Possible compensatory adaptations through redundant oxygen receptors. The Clinian biologist scribbled something on a membrane tablet. He should be tested under gravitational variance. Kalen held up both hands. Let's not get carried away. Dr. Krezel nodded once. This concludes the live demonstration. You are dismissed. However, we request a follow-up scan during the next solar interval. As Kalen left the platform, Helvix followed. You did not panic. I was trying not to vomit. Still, most species exhibit involuntary spasms. You remain communicative. I've had worse, Kalen muttered. Once inhaled smoke from a burning rubber plant back home. Thought I was going to die. Turned out to be fine. Helvix looked genuinely puzzled. You expose yourselves to chemical combustion byproducts voluntarily? That was an accident. But yes, we've got entire sports where people light things on fire. Helvix walked silently for a few steps. You continue to rewrite our assumptions. Later that cycle, Kalen returned to his quarters and found a parcel on his bunk. Inside was a tightly wound scroll and a sealed vial of amber fluid. The scroll read, in honor of your respiratory fortitude. A Syrexian gift of breath honey distilled from sub-zero root moss. May it soothe the airways. He uncorked the vial and sniffed. It smelled like rust and cinnamon. He set it on his shelf next to the laminated commendation. By the following rotation, Kalen had been flagged for potential interspecies resilience profiling, which meant he was now part of a rotating study group featuring a rotating list of increasingly improbable tests. First came the temperature tolerance exposure. He stood, barefoot, on a ceramic slab while the ambient temperature fluctuated from freezing to stifling. He shivered, swore, and eventually asked for a pair of socks. Then came the reflex experiment, where tiny drones fired soft pellets at random intervals. Kalen batted away most of them with the reflexes honed from hundreds of hours of outside racquetball. Each test ended with alien researchers muttering in disbelief, recalibrating instruments, or asking if he had undergone genetic enhancements. Kalen answered the same way each time. I grew up in the Midwest. That's enhancement enough. On the 5th cycle, Dr. Krezel requested one-on-one consultation. They sat in a compact observation dome overlooking the star-skinned horizon of the Tavronil's current orbit. The stars seemed to shift like ink in water. We are considering requesting additional humans for study, Dr. Krezel said. That sounds like a diplomatic nightmare waiting to happen. Perhaps. But you represent an anomaly worth exploring. Maybe I'm just stubborn. Dr. Krezel tapped her lower mandible. It is possible. But your species shows a trend. Your kind survives under conditions that destabilize most known physiology. Kalen shrugged. We've had a rough history. Makes you either adaptable or extinct. Dr. Krezel stared at him for several seconds. Your resilience is not elegance. It is improvisational. Messy. But effective. Story of our planet. She nodded once and stood. You will be informed of the next trial within 2 cycles. Until then, rest. As Kalen left the dome, he passed another Syrexian researcher muttering into a translator note. The phrase caught his ear. They bleed easily, but do not stop moving. Back in his quarters, Kalen lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't sure if he was becoming famous or just the galaxy's favorite lab rat, but at least, for now, he wasn't itchy. It was 3 days after the symposium when Kalen found himself standing half-naked in a refrigerated cargo unit, arms held slightly away from his body, while 2 Syrexian engineers adjusted a thermal array above his head. The room was filled with the distant hum of climate regulators and the occasional metallic ping from the cooling vents. "I thought this was a medical evaluation," Kalen said, teeth beginning to chatter. "Not cryogenic cosplay. The goal is to observe core temperature management in low-stimulus environments," said the engineer adjusting the panel. "Minimal movement, no thermal wear, and no preconditioning. Duration, 30 minutes. You want me to stand here and freeze for half an hour?" The second engineer, whose name was unpronounceable but responded to a whistle click, turned toward him. "You may blink." "Great. That'll keep me warm." A vent opened overhead, releasing a stream of air so cold it stung his skin. Kalen reflexively hunched his shoulders, then forced himself to stand straight. The engineers retreated behind a transparent barrier and took notes on a shared screen. At the 10-minute mark, his lips were purple and his fingers had gone numb. He tapped his foot to keep circulation going. "Is this really helpful?" he called out. The whistle-click engineer responded without looking up. "You are maintaining muscle cohesion beyond the projected time." "Fascinating. That's not the word I'd use." The cold burrowed into his joints like a dull drill. He tried thinking about warm things, grilled cheese, a summer dock, hot pavement under bare feet, but it didn't help. Despite the shivering, he didn't collapse. At minute 28, his legs buckled slightly, but he caught himself. At 31 minutes, the door hissed open and a Syrexian medic stepped in with a heated wrap. "Test completed," she said. Kalen took the wrap and draped it around his shoulders, his skin prickling as sensation returned. "You all have a weird idea of fun. We are building a neurothermal map for your species. Your endurance exceeded all prior models. Can I get dressed now?" "Of course." Dry garments are provided in the adjacent chamber. After pulling on a thermal jumpsuit and rubbing life back into his toes, Kalen returned to his quarters, where a tray of high-protein rations awaited him. He sat on the edge of his bunk, chewing the synthetic meat while scrolling through his task queue. One entry caught his attention: Environmental Systems Calibration Seawater Containment. He tapped it, and a prompt appeared: Human oversight required for salinity variance protocols. An hour later, he stood knee-deep in a saltwater tank in the biology wing, surrounded by glass walls and floating specimens. The water was warm, a welcome change, but thick with brine. A Zarnathi aquaculturalist hovered nearby, its jelly-like limbs shifting with the current. "Your epidermis is ideal for salinity exposure. Absorption rates are within stable limits." "I'm not a sponge," Kalen said, adjusting the seal on his gloves. "What exactly am I supervising?" "The salinity index must be monitored during the introduction of terrestrial flora. Your skin response will indicate balance." He splashed a handful of water onto a floating sensor. "So I'm a human pH strip now?" "Correct." Kalen sighed and knelt to examine the submerged root structures. "These mosses aren't going to survive this concentration. You need to dilute by at least 20%. The Zarnathi blinked its central node. "Your intuition is noted. Adjustment in progress." As the water level lowered and fresh solution was added, Kalen watched the moss begin to unfurl. He ran a hand along his forearm, noting dry patches already forming. "Can I get some kind of ointment for this?" A robotic assistant rolled over and extended a dispenser. He applied the salve, which smelled like mint and copper, and stepped out of the tank. Back in the corridor, he encountered Helvix, who was holding a new diagnostic tool shaped like a coiled vine. "I heard about the cold chamber trial," Helvix said without preamble. "You did not suffer any organ slowdown. Just frostbite in places I'd rather not discuss." Helvix extended the vine-shaped device. "This is a cranial pattern mapper. We would like to examine your response to sustained auditory dissonance." Kalen took a step back. "Are you trying to give me a headache now?" "It is for neural elasticity testing. You know, you could just ask if I've ever been to a heavy metal concert." Helvix blinked all 6 eyes. "What is metal, and why is it heavy?" Kalen rubbed his temples. "Forget it. When is this test happening?" "Now." "It will take 6 minutes." He followed Helvix into his small chamber lined with acoustic panels. The device was placed against his temple, and a series of sounds began to cycle: whistles, clicks, grinding tones, then something that resembled a goat sneezing underwater. Kalen clenched his jaw. You sure this isn't a prank? Please refrain from speaking. Auditory centers are being mapped. At minute 4, the tone shifted into overlapping frequencies that caused a throbbing behind his eyes. He gritted his teeth and stared at the ceiling, counting backward from 100. When it finally stopped, he yanked the device off. Well, I'm not brain dead. That count for anything? Helvix examined the readout. Neural pathways show rapid adaptation. You filtered the dissonance subconsciously. Because it was awful. My brain wanted to survive. That may be a human trait worth cataloging. Later that evening, Dr. Krezel summoned him to the observation deck. The starscape outside shimmered with soft reds and muted greens, nebula light bending around the hull. You completed the full series of environmental resilience trials, she said, hands folded behind her back. Do I get a badge or something? You get clearance. We've submitted your data to the Allied Species Council. Human physiology is now recognized as adaptive under a broader range of conditions than previously assumed. So no more surprise experiments? None authorized. Kalen leaned on the railing. Good. Because I was one test away from building a raft and paddling back to Earth. Dr. Krezel turned toward him. Why do you think your species endures so many extremes? He considered for a moment. We don't have a choice. Every obstacle we face, we either adapt to it or die from it. People think courage is about never getting scared, but really, it's just acting anyway. That would explain your species' proliferation despite structural inefficiencies. We make up for it in stubbornness. She nodded. Your participation has advanced our understanding significantly. The Council will likely request Earth-based consultation in future projects, just as long as they don't stick anyone else in a freezer. Noted. As he left the observation deck, he passed a group of young Syrexian cadets poring over a schematic titled Human Thermoregulation Systems, Lessons from the Truce Model. He paused, glanced at the title, and shook his head. Back in his quarters, he shut the door, peeled off his boots, and stretched out on his bunk. The lights dimmed automatically. No alarms. No summons. No invasive tests. Just silence. And for the first time in weeks, he fell asleep without wondering what part of his anatomy would be analyzed next.